Good afternoon for this post-lunch session on climate and energy security in a globalized world. I understand that we are running behind the schedule, and when it happens, sometimes organizers ask to wrap up the session earlier than planned. So do we still have 1 hour time, Abhishek? Right? All right, thank you. Let me, on behalf of the panel and all of you here, thank ORF to begin with for putting together such an important and timely agenda and bring together knowledgeable speakers. You know, when I had first attended the Conference of Parties for Climate Negotiations back in 2008, I was surprised to hear that the leader from Tuvalu was saying that US, you should help us, you should fulfill your historical responsibility, you should support developing countries and least developed countries as was agreed in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. But if you can't, then please don't stand in the way and get out of the way. Now, today we find ourselves in a situation where US is actually planning to get out of the way, but the reaction is slightly different. Now, we are in a moment, or we are at a moment which Indian delegation had feared about 30 years ago when the United Nations Framework Convention was being negotiated, and in particular Article 3.5. What did Article 3.5 say? It said that access to market will not be constrained, hindered in the name of climate measures. Now what we find that we are seeing a collaboration, and it's a very uneasy collaboration, and I'm using the word collaboration deliberately, that on the one hand, EU is using non-tariff barriers such as CBAM to limit the access to developing country products into its market. And on the other hand, US is threatening to impose tariffs on the exports from developing countries, and particularly India, China. So on one side, you have a climate denier. On the other side, you have somebody in EU who have been, trying to portray themselves as climate champion, but both of them are doing same thing. They are trying to limit, restricts the opportunities, possibilities of growing for major developing economies. And it is in this context, I think, this session is very important, that the world is globalized, but tendencies are that of deglobalization. And while the situations have changed, circumstances have changed, India and other developing countries have made significant progress in terms of learning curves on energy transition. The prices of, for example, solar have come down drastically in last 15 years. And India is giving leadership on how to build cooperation to promote renewable energy transition away from fossil fuels. So it is in that context, India finds itself in a very unique position. A strong defense is needed against the tendencies of deglobalization in a very specific context, as well as the opportunity for leadership, sharing its experience and learning with other developing countries. Once again, we have that opportunity to lead. And I call it's our historical responsibility also to lead the developing countries in this global conundrum. Now, transitions are not easy, they are multi-layered, and we have a very wonderful, exciting panel to give us a overview of the different layers of transition where both learnings and challenges are there. We have Madam Nisha Pandey, who is Director, Gujarat Institute of Development Research, Ahmedabad. Gujarat is one of the potential beneficiary in terms of resource endowments as well as efforts in leading renewable energy transition. So, what are the challenges and opportunities when you are resource rich is something that we have to learn and build upon. Then we have Mandvi Singh, who is Program Director, Clean Energy, iForest, New Delhi. Now, colleagues at iForest are doing some phenomenal work understanding the different implications of energy transition across states. So, interstate challenges of transition, that's another important question of equity in designing national strategies and policies, and how it interacts with the global context, that is another dimension. Then we have Dr. Amit Bhandari. He's a Senior Fellow, Energy Investment and Connectivity at Gateway House. He is more focused on what is needed, what is important for us now, so that we can build for future. So that's another dimension. What are the trade-offs between fossil fuels and renewable trajectory? And then we have Rishabh Jain. He's a Senior Program Lead at CEW, who will tell us more about what are the nitty-gritties of industrial interventions, what kind of possibilities there are, what kind of challenges there are within the industry that has to lead this transition, and how it is important for the overall objective of climate and energy security. So with those words, I would invite Ma'am Nisha Pandey to share her experience from Gujarat.
Hello. Thank you, Manishji, for a nice introduction and making this background to start with. I extend my thanks to ORF Foundation for inviting me to talk about what little I know. So I will talk about what I know, what I understand, and it's my reality. You know, whatever we know, and we interpret the things based on our reality and our understanding. It may be not acceptable to others, that's quite possible, and it may be because your reality and your understanding, your theory and practice and your training would be different, so maybe it is, but I'll talk about my experience and what we are doing at GIDR and based on the policy. Our focus is impact assessment of various policies of government. We do research and we do advocacy, and we meet frequently with the bureaucrats, and then that knowledge that experience I will share here. Now come to the point about the energy security and the climate change and all. In Indian context, I will start with the philosophy of Indian context. In India, talk about Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Bhavantu Niramaya. So this is in our philosophy, and where we start with the Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina means everyone should be happy and should be happy, and there should not be any sickness or any illness like that. So when we start with this philosophy of Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina and Akhanda Mandala Karam, or maybe we talk about holistic approach of development. So holistic approach of development means no one leave behind, and that also is the part of SDG, that no one leave behind, and that is the philosophy of Indian scriptures, no one leave behind, and that's what we are talking about. We should talk about. Our Honorable Prime Minister, he start with this energy saving and climate change. What he has talked about, that we should healing the planet with the sustainable lifestyle. It is quoted that healing the planet with the sustainable lifestyle, and that's what he is talking about. What is the healing the planet with sustainable lifestyle? It will include everything. See, so healing the planet with sustainable lifestyle. Sustainability lifestyle means what? It's talking about use solar energy, right? Use less consumption. So conscious consumption, conscious production. How conscious consumption will possible? When you are more conscious. When we are more conscious, when our all policymakers, everyone is conscious. What does it mean, consciousness? Consciousness means, so what I understood with the policy analysis and policy impact, we keep on suggesting always something new, because this is missing, this should be happen, this should be the part of policy. But if you observe the policies of the government and you go through the objective of policy, you will find, I think, whatever we are thinking is there in the objective of the policy. And we go through objectives of policy like mission, solar mission policy or international alliance, solar alliance. I went through, I found whatever we are talking is there in the policy in an objective. The first step should be, or maybe the step is, as a policy maker or as a think tank or intellectual, we should go through the objectives and see, is there anything missing? I found no. But the issue is always the issue comes in the under implementation. Whatever research we have done at GIDR, we found there is a problem in implementation, and sometimes this is a dissemination of maybe all the benefit which was designed by the government, how these objectives and the benefit are reaching towards the last point, end point, maybe grassroots level. Why these benefits are not reaching at the end of the point or the grassroots level, there is a leakage. And that leakage or that dissemination and the benefit which is not reaching, there are some problem. The problem are not that the government has not thought of. The problem it starts from implementation, or maybe designing the policy is fine, but the reaching the policy at the last point. Here I found that, and we did some study of aspirational district program. In aspirational district program, there is an integration of various policy. So convergence of policy, where government is taking care of environment, society, education, infrastructure. So this is the integration of, now government is talking about convergence of policy. For example, Prime Minister Awas Yojana, it will not be successful if there is no water in that housing scheme. Then if there will not be possible this scheme is successful if there is not electricity, if there is no education. So now the convergence of various policy for providing better housing, that is the part of sustainability. If sustainable housing is required and to make it successful, government has to integrate other schemes, and that's what government is doing. If housing schemes are there, then government is integrating with the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, Nal Se Jal Yojana, then electricity Yojana. Then another thing is coming up very clearly in Gujarat is a natural farming, sustainable agriculture, which is again, if we link it with the sustainability and Indian scriptures, that is Bharti Krishi Paddhati. What is Bharti Krishi Paddhati? They are working on the no use of fertilizer, no use of chemical. And that is again the example and model of sustainability, with the use of cow dung and the use of cow urine is mainly utilized in the natural farming, and the natural farming is proved as a most sustainable farming, where the lesser use of chemical, and we also call it zero budget farming. Zero budget farming, that is an ecosystem which is self-sustainable for sustainable agriculture. So the question is how we are talking about energy and climate, that is through making an ecosystem which is self-sustainable, which is not burdening, which is not putting pressure to the environment for making another policy. So trying to understand and making the policy integrated, which will help to sustainability. And then what we are talking about, the solar alliance, mission solar. Government has made a mission, only one single mission, that is solar mission. Means in the solar mission, if you go through the objective of solar mission, what I found, government has included each and everything which we should think about. Now the part of implementation, the solar mission. So how the solar panel and the solar energy and the contribution and the sharing of partnership with the other public-private partnership and the stakeholder engagement. Government has tried to do all possible effort to make Mission Solar successful. So Mission Solar successful is there. Government is thinking about to make these things workable. Now the question is how to make it integrated with other policies. So overall, if I talk about the climate and energy, we need to work with a community-based development, with the convergence of the policy, collaboration of the policy, and the competition. So there are three philosophy and three major areas which government is focusing on: convergence, collaboration, and competition. So they are making few model village, and now these few model villages are a standard for other village. And government is doing some dashboard and competition. If the village is performing well, that would become in the top village, and the village who is not performing well, maybe they can take some examples, take some help from that best performer village, and can be the model village. So in this way, with the convergence of various policies and the various scheme, government is working for making everyone well off and leaving no one behind, with the better implementation of policy. So my suggestion or conclusion based on my experience is that instead of always looking something new, always looking that this is not there, this should be there, if you look at all the policies and objectives and just look at which objective is not addressed. If 10 objectives are there for one scheme, if 2 objectives are not addressed, as a social scientist and as a policy and policy advocacy, we can talk about the government had addressed these 7 or 8 objectives, maybe 2 objectives are remaining. Can we work in these 2 objectives with the collaborative approach? Can we propose some resources or intellectual resources or something where these remaining 2 objectives can be fulfilled? That's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishaji, for spelling out the landscape of policy implementation in India. While there are many things one can talk about, I'm mindful of the time. And being a climate policy researcher, I always think in terms of budget, emission budget, time budget. Our previous sessions ate up a lot of budget, so this generation has a responsibility to compensate for it. So I would directly go to Mandvi. Mandvi, floor is yours.
Thank you, Manish. So I work with an organization called International Forum for Environment, Sustainability and Technology. And like Manish said, I, along with a lot of my colleagues, have been really focusing on just energy transitions for quite a few time now, like more than 3 years or 4 years at this point. The approach that we've sort of adopted for our work has been a very bottom-up approach, wherein we are looking at really understanding at a district level, what is the implication of a transition, what is needed to really make it just and equitable from all perspectives. and then going upwards towards what needs to be done at the state level, at the national level, and then at the global level. How do we engage with this better understanding of what are the challenges that exist at the ground level? So fundamentally, one understanding that we've reached at is that energy transitions, at the core of it, is really a redevelopment question. It's a development question, it's a redevelopment question. In that, then it brings all the complexities and the multi-dimensional aspects that Manish was also referring to. That you have to address energy security, you have to address existing economic infrastructures, create new ones, provide for jobs, skill for the new energy economy or the job economy that emerges in these regions, etc., etc. So it's really a multi-dimensional aspect that you're trying to kind of address while talking about transitions. The good news here is that already in the sort of multilateral, bilateral cooperation space, development question has been essentially the fundamental question that has been always sort of at the primary objective that they're trying to address. So the structures for it, they exist in some ways, which can be leveraged and built upon to additionally address this new pathway that you want to kind of build. So of course there's a finance requirement, there's a technology requirement, but then fundamentally there's also a capacity question that needs to be addressed right up front. Do these people have the decision-making tools in place to identify the best low-carbon pathway for them, and then to move on with it? And I'm not just talking about the coal regions of India, but also globally. So this, again, across these three dimensions, across finance, across technology, across capacity, is how multilateralism has anyways moved in the past. But I think the idea is that, you do not move, in terms of addressing questions in certain silos, but have a comprehensive approach. And even if you grow gradually, the approach needs to be comprehensive. And I think this is how, this is where I'd sort of say that maybe EU's internal approach was a lot more successful wherein they looked at, regional transition planning and then supplementing it with the funds, the JT fund that they created. And this is where maybe JETPs lagged, wherein they were trying to address a certain question in a silo and not really looking at transitions as a comprehensive challenge. So from the existing structures, like ma'am was saying, that it's not always a question of creating new ones, but you have to sort of review what you have and then build on it. It's a very aligned structure that already exists that can be leveraged. Now you may argue whether UNFCCC is the right platform for it, with all 200 odd countries put together and then agreeing to a outcome, because at the end of the day, coal is, if coal is the key question here in transitions, of course oil, etc. also come in. But as far as coal is concerned, it's a matter of 20 countries who account for more than 90% of the production and consumption. So maybe a new structure which is building upon the existing ones, which are addressing a very specific and focused questions, could be the way forward, potentially. But yeah, India does have an advantage there, because we are also trying to look at what opportunities to lead India has. It's the success that the country has seen as far as RE growth and other promotion of clean technologies is concerned has been exemplary. It's been recognized globally. So that position of leadership is sort of organically coming in, especially in the global south domain. But I think a little more work from the perspective of the comprehensiveness of transitions that I was alluding to, in terms of how do you support internal coal regions. And there is big opportunity internally to kind of leverage, because at the end of the day, even now, the coal regions of this country remain sort of some of the most economically disadvantaged and backward, if that's the word. But yeah, you have, as a part of this energy transition question, the opportunity to then address also these economic disadvantages that have crept in because of, economic resource inefficiency or whatever else. So yeah, so a lot of opportunities both externally and internally. I'll stop at that and come back to maybe talk more about coal regions in the follow-up. Thanks.
Thank you, Manvit. Just a quick clarification. I'm not sure if I understood you correctly. At one point you mentioned that multilateralism probably is not working and we would need alternative.
No.
So
that's not
what
I
you
said.
said,
No.
right?
I said that you can learn from what has not worked to build and leverage on existing structures.
Okay. It's an important point to clarify. Yeah. Okay. So I think this is a very important point to move on to our next speaker, Mr. Dr. Amit Bhandari. There have always been issues with regard to trade-offs. Creating new structures, be it in the governance domain or in creating new techno-economic structures, they are fraught with challenges. There are multiple trade-offs involved. There are embedded interests. For example, India's NDC identified a few technologies, ultra supercritical technology and IGCC. They are coal-based technologies. When the global narrative on climate change is to move away from coal-based technologies, the IPR-related issues on these technologies still hinder India's access to these technology. So with that context, I understand Amit is going to speak about the fossil fuel industry and what's happening within it. I hand it over to Amit.
Yeah, thank you, Manish. Thank you again, ORF, also for inviting me. Now, the first point I would like to make is that fossil fuels and especially coal and oil have a very, very long runway ahead of them. If I had to make a projection 20, 25 years down the line, I would say that the bulk of our transport would still be running on diesel, and bulk of our electricity, today it is 70%, maybe it will be a little less, but the vast bulk is going to come from coal. Nuclear will not be more than 5 or 6%, and renewable, I think, has reached as far as it can. Unless there are some very dramatic advances in technology, this mix is not really changing. Now, we also need to separate the issue of climate change and pollution. I think one often merges into the other, and sometimes you have a push against diesel or coal coming from the climate change lobby, using pollution as the evidence. That again needs to be separated. Pollution is a local issue and a very local failure. It is a bit like when we have floods in Mumbai or Bangalore or Chennai. That is because we have concretized all the waterways. It is not because of climate change. So that needs to be separated. Now, unfortunately, the whole climate change renewable narrative has some very real world consequences. So in 2022, when the war started in Ukraine, there were price shocks in multiple commodities, and the biggest one happened in natural gas. Europeans suddenly stopped buying gas from Russia, and to make up for the energy shortfall, they started buying liquefied natural gas from elsewhere. In the process, they pushed up the price of gas by about 4 to 5 times. So what was the result? Now, two of our neighbors, Bangladesh and Pakistan, I said earlier that we get 70% of our electricity from coal. Pakistan and Bangladesh get most of their electricity from gas, which is a cleaner fuel. Suddenly, these two countries found that they were competing with Germany to buy LNG. The winter of 2022 was a winter of electricity and energy shortages for these countries. Economies took a big hit. Governments took on a lot of debt. And these two countries are in a deep financial hole right now. And a good part of it is because of the wrong choice they have made by going in for natural gas. I would say that some of the economic distress also boiled over as anger in Bangladesh earlier in 2024. Not entirely, but it was a substantial reason for what happened over there. Now, the larger lesson is, I think, that economies need to use energy which is suitable for them and which is suited to their level of development. Unfortunately, I think India seems to have drunk the climate Kool-Aid. So I said that coal gives about 70% of our power. Now, in 2019, December, we had about 198 gigawatts of coal-fired power capacity. In December 2024, this came up to, I think, 212 gigawatts, which means 7% in about 5 years. Our economy is supposed to grow at 6.5 to 7%. So really in half a decade, we did nothing, we stood still. So this really happens when you start, when you cannot separate the real from the theater. And I think this is something we need to keep sight of. So what are the action points? I think the first action point is that we need to, as I said earlier, separate the real from the theater. We can make, we can do some breast beating about how the orange man is evil and multilateralism has been destroyed. But I think while doing that, we can quietly go in for coal-fired power again in a big way. We will need it. It is going to be needed. The second part is that our neighbors can also gain from the coal-fired capacity we have. I gave the example of Bangladesh and Pakistan. Both of them have energy that they cannot afford. At least we can explore connectivity with countries such as Sri Lanka, which can buy electricity from India. Sri Lanka cannot obviously build its own coal-fired power at this point of time. The third point I would like to make is that India should help other developing countries at a similar level of development in setting up coal-fired power plants. The reason why China's Belt and Road Initiative made such a huge headway initially was that they offered to build coal-fired power plants for emerging economies. In the last 25 years, no Western bank has funded a single coal-fired power plant anywhere in the world. Now, I am a country with maybe a $1,500, $1,800 per capita income, but I am told that either you set up solar or you go for LNG, we will not do coal for you. When China offered to do this, obviously countries jumped. And if you look at the BRI projects in Pakistan and Bangladesh, the bulk of the money has gone into coal-fired power. The fourth point I would like to make is that this is on resources specifically. We import about 85%, 90% of our oil. The number is not going to change. And we will import more gas and also critical elements that will come up. We need to start investing in these resources overseas. It doesn't always have to be an Indian company trying to operate a mine in another country. It can be a financial investment. And perhaps the best place at this point of time would be to acquire small, purely financial stakes in American oil and gas companies, listed companies. They pay high dividends. The monetary income from these investments partly offsets high oil prices, if such a thing happens. And finally, the last point I would like to make it that India also needs to give up certain non-serious ideas. One of those which has been floating around and which I think thankfully is dead now is a BRICS currency. If at all, I think it is the Indian rupee which can play a larger role in the region as a currency of trade. This was the case in the past. And I think as the Indian economy grows, this is likely to become a little more, we are going to see more of that as well. That is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. You make an interesting case for continuing with coal and also link it with India's global aspirations. And of course, there is a possibility of an interesting debate, but just for the sake of connecting, I simplify your assertion to say that India made a mistake by putting its bets on renewable energy. And with that, I would provoke Rishabh to counter that.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Abhishek. I'm Rishabh, and I work at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. We are a 15-year-old policy research institution based in New Delhi, India. I lead two teams at CW. One is called Technology Futures and one is Energy Transitions. And the work that we do, we work very closely with both central and state governments on topics such as I said, energy transitions, a lot of focus on rooftop, but also on manufacturing, critical minerals, etc. Many things that were just said by some of my fellow panelists earlier are very important and critical, but I would also want to say that despite a lot of challenges that exist in energy transition, I would still say, and it's correct that there'll be huge dependence on thermal oil projects going forward, and we need to definitely segregate real from theater, but at the same time, there's much more that we can still do on energy transition. And there's a timeline that the government has set for itself, which is 2017 at zero. So there's still 45 years to achieve those targets. But only if we start now and in the next decade will we be able to see the consequences in 2070. Otherwise, as Amit said, if we don't do now, even after 25, 30 years, a lot of our transportation power sector will continue to be reliable on a lot of these conventional projects. So I would want to talk about three broad things. One is generally on energy transitions and energy security, Make in India, and the geopolitics around some of these things. As was pointed out, we have committed to net zero by 2070. Of course, more details need to emerge. The thinking within the central government and state governments need to emerge. There's a 500 gigawatt non-fossil power capacity target by 2030. Unfortunately, at the pace at which we are deploying, it's very likely that we'll miss those targets. We are at this particular moment around 220 gigawatts of non-fossil, and maybe doubling it in the next 5 years seems like a challenge itself. But there are some positive signs. While we may not be able to achieve 500, it may take a couple of more years to reach there. Two of the most important challenges there is the availability of land and the transmission capacity across the country. And this is only when we are talking about 500 gigawatts. Some of the analysis that CW has done for 2070 net zero shows that we may require up to 5,000 gigawatts of solar by 2070. That's from 250 gigawatts in 2030 to maybe 5,000 gigawatts of 2070. It's multi-magnitude jump. And if the land and transmission challenges remain, how we achieve those can be sometimes very difficult. And unless and until there are significant technological breakthroughs, some of these challenges will continue to remain. And this then brings me to the second point on Make in India. The annual deployment of solar power that happened last year, in the last FY was around 15, and in this FY we expect it to be around 25. This may go ahead to 30-35 gigawatts of solar per year in the next few years. The wind unfortunately has been lacking. We are not seeing the numbers that we should, but maybe around 4 to 5 gigawatts per year. But these numbers, and if some of the foundational challenges are solved, these numbers are expected to increase to maybe around 50 gigawatts of solar per year. To put some of these numbers in context, China deployed around 200 plus gigawatt of solar in last year itself. So that is more than our cumulative solar deployed capacity itself. So anyways, these numbers will continue to increase, not maybe at the pace at which we would want in the recent years, but they'll continue to increase. With this, what comes is the possibility of economic opportunity if we manufacture some of these technologies here. So you would have seen a lot of EVs in the country, in cities like Delhi and others, the number of EV sales are increasing, which also means that a lot of the batteries that are required are also going up. Solar power, as I said, is increasing. There's also a PM Surya Ghar Yojana, where the government wants to deploy 30 gigawatts of solar at 10 lakh households in the next 3 years. There are a few other targets also. So in many of these technologies, we have been highly dependent on imports, specifically from China. There are two problems. One is we are letting go of the potential jobs that can be created in India and the economic opportunity associated with it. And then there's a potential supply side vulnerability that we are in when we have as high as 90-95% dependence on some of these components from China or Chinese companies manufacturing in countries in Southeast Asia. Because of these, the government in the last couple of years has come up with many interesting policies. You may have heard about it, the Make in India, production linked incentives, some of the tariff, non-tariff barriers to support domestic manufacturing. And to give you some example, a couple of years ago, India had a solar module manufacturing capacity. It is a basic assembly step, but that number was around 20 gigawatts. At this particular moment, that capacity is around 70 gigawatts of manufacturing. Because of some of the policies that the government has implemented in the last 2 to 3 years. But while the manufacturing capacity is 70-75 gigawatts, expected to cross 100, as I said, the deployment is around 25. So now from less manufacturing, we have a manufacturing surplus, which has a different set of problem. On the batteries, we are still not necessarily manufacturing at the pace at which we should, and there are tons of challenges. But I'll come back to solar. in the previous year, because of such high deployment, and not just India, many other countries looking to diversify their imports out of China, we exported solar modules worth $2 billion in the previous FY. 98% of that went to America. And this was the first year where we saw such high exports, because many of the American companies did not necessarily wanted China manufactured modules. So we were able to increase the levels of Indian content and then sell it. Now the challenge of geopolitics comes in, where we have seen Trump put in tariffs on Canada, potential tariffs, of course, they've rolled back, but on Canada, Mexico, other countries, including China. And if tariffs are also implemented on India, it's a big vulnerability for the Indian manufacturers, because competing with even Chinese companies in non-China locations can be a huge challenge. So that is the geopolitics angle. And then I think what was earlier mentioned by Abhishek was also there are other non-tariff barriers such as CBAM that countries in Europe are adopting. There are issues in terms of standards, transparency, etc. The other aspect that we are seeing is not just the manufacturing capacity in India is slightly higher. The manufacturing capacity of solar, wind, batteries, EVs in China is up to 5 times of the global demand. This then means what is happening is that the prices, because they also need to survive, and there are of course many benefits that the Chinese government is providing, the prices of all these technologies are at all-time low in China. Of course, there are other tariffs that many countries like India have implemented, so we are not necessarily benefiting from that, but sometimes these are dumping artificial prices. But a solar module per watt peak, say for instance, is available at 8 to 9 rupees per watt peak in China, whereas India made module in India with, I would say, 50% indigenization is available at 20 to 23 rupees. So that is the level of difference that exists. Batteries, for instance, are available at 7,000, 6,000 rupees per kilowatt hour in China, whereas in India it may be 3 times the cost. And that is where you may see on LinkedIn or other posts the kind of vehicles that are completely unimaginable available in China, also them selling in Europe in 15 lakh, 20 lakh, very good looking vehicles that are available because of significant cost reduction. Now competing with these is a huge challenge, and what is happening is we are putting in tariff barriers, but in some way also delaying the energy transition. But so if EVs, maybe China made EVs are available at a lower price than the EVs manufactured in India, we are putting in 100, 150% tariff barrier, which then means that, okay, we are not buying EVs, but we may go back to buying petrol or diesel vehicles. There's also significant changes in technology. There are many battery manufacturers, wind turbine manufacturers that are setting up some of these facilities or have set up some of these facilities, but they have not necessarily invested in R&D in India for a long period of time. Now what is happening is, due to technological changes, the technologies that are being manufactured in India are also becoming obsolete very quickly. So there are of course some programs run by DST and some of the ministries to increase the capability of many of these companies, but at the pace at which we are seeing many of these technology change, we have to always be on our toe. But despite all of this, the government in the budget a couple of days ago has doubled down on many of these topics. So there's a national manufacturing mission, there's an export promotion mission, and there's a national center for excellence for skilling that has been announced. Few weeks ago, the government announced the critical minerals mission with outlay of 16,000 crores. As a knowledge partner to Ministry of Mines, we also played a very active role in helping develop that document. So along with some of the existing policies, and if we can increase our deployment rates and targets with some active geopolitical discussions with countries in US, but also using some of the platforms like Quad IPEF, there's a real possibility that we can also leverage the economic potential and jobs that come with this, and at the same time accelerate the pace of energy transition in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishabh. I think what the numerous examples that Rishabh has presented, they clearly point to one thing, that the question of energy transition and energy security in the current global context, as well as the long-term goals of decarbonization, is full of many if then, if but sort of scenarios. And one probably would need to have a broader macro look at it. I personally feel that in the history of globalization or global politics, control over knowledge, technologies, and resources together or in combination has played a very important role for supporting the aspirations that countries nurture or wish to achieve. And I think that is very central to the both ideas that Amit and Rishabh presented, be it aspiring for a coal-dominated presence across the countries, even if it is in smaller form, or exploring the opportunities in the green transition that is going on. I would keep that question of gaining technological independence or self-reliance in this context for later, for Rishabh and Amit to reflect on. But we have about 14 minutes left, and I think it's enough time, good time, to have quick comments or questions from the audience. So please raise your hand and give a brief introduction of yourself as well. Okay, first here, and then we'll come to you, sir.
I am Steve, senior researcher at GeoJuris today. So we are heavily dependent on oil and gas today. We have made a good push in renewables, but again, we are heavily dependent. Sir mentioned manufacturing capability we have increased, but the raw material, the components needed for battery or the newly hyped small modular reactor, US is leveraging the technology. So again, is it going to be the next oil and gas thing? We might be good at filtering the oil and gas, but again, we are dependent on the crude. So is it going to be the next that thing?
Okay, maybe we'll collect a couple of questions, so please. Can somebody take mic to her?
Mohan Kumar from Public Policy Research Institute, Trivandrum. See, I have a couple of questions to the entire panel. The first question is that in January 20, our US President has announced his withdrawal from the Paris Climate Change Summit and also decided to slow down the process of production of manufacturing of electric vehicles in US. What would be its impact globally? What kind of message? That is first thing. Second issue which I would like to the panel to discuss is that when we discuss about climate change, we discuss at the macro level, at the aggregate level, but its impact is always felt at the micro level. Dr. Nisha must be from Gujarat, and she must be knowing that in the Arabian Sea, the production of the poor man's fish has substantially, size has changed. Like earlier, 5 fishes would give 1 kg weight. Now it is more than 30 fish you have to put. It is called sardine fish. Now they cannot sell it in the market. That the production from June to December, mostly this fish come in the seashore of Gujarat to Kerala. This fisherman community is seriously, their issues has not been addressed. I always felt at the micro level. That has to be discussed at the third issue which I would like to harp is that the solar renewable energy issue, when we discuss, there is a policy bias in the whole, because government of India gives 75,000 subsidy to the rooftop solar installation, but there are millions of people with the house, but their roofs are not adequate, sufficient enough to support a installation process, and mostly it is hovering around the subsidies availed by a section of the population, but the major chunk of the poor population is unable to avail the subsidy and go for the solar energy production. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a third question? Yes, back there.
Thank you. I am Bichuparaja from the Center for Air Studies, New Delhi. I just curious because I don't have any background in energy or climate change. I'm just curious to know, at any point of global discussion, there is one significant environmental challenge. Sometimes it was the ozone layer hole, now it is the carbon or decarbonization, which dominates a lot of debate, and maybe a lot of unintended consequences are not foreseen in a channelized attention towards one problem. Why I'm basing this is like all the photovoltaics, all the storage, all the electronics which go into making this transition also have a particular life. And what about the environmental hazards after they are withdrawn? Are they receiving the adequate attention? Or in say future, say 3 decades from now, we are going to be faced with a much larger problem of how to get rid of this kind of waste in our haste towards this transition?
Thank you for your question. I think we'll go the other way around. We start with Rishabh. You don't have to take all the questions, whichever you feel like.
Sure.
And looking at the watch, maybe 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes.
Sure. So in terms of resource dependence, I would say we cannot change, unfortunately, the resource endowments that various countries have, right? So if we don't have oil and gas, we just don't have. And if we don't have some of the minerals, we just don't have. There's not much that we can do other than, of course, exploration. There's much need specifically for mineral exploration. In the recent critical mineral mission, the government has laid the emphasis to explore, I think, 1,200 projects until 2030 related to critical minerals. And hopefully, if some of these, we find them viable, we'll go into mining, etc. But until that, mining after exploration can take up to 10 years also. So I'm saying maybe by 2035, 40 is when we may actually get some of these minerals. But in the meantime, we have to rely on the bilateral treaties with other countries where you may have the resources, like Australia, many countries in Latin America, Africa, etc. And India has set up something called Kabil to procure minerals from outside many years ago. As I said, there has not been necessarily, it has not been as successful as it should have been, but of course we have taken an initiative itself. But specifically, I think one point that should be noticed is on the component manufacturing, as you mentioned, right? India still highly depends on many of these components, and they come from China, not just India, globally. So up to, in some of these, for instance, wafer, the global wafer manufacturing, 95% happens in China. So it's not just India which is dependent. All the developed world is also dependent on China itself. Two reasons. One is the new tech exists in China, unfortunately. I mean, 10 years ago it was in Europe, maybe America, but slowly, because they thought that, okay, in the globalized world we can import from anywhere, it went in and the focus was lost. But now they are rethinking and reprioritizing to develop some of these technologies. Everyone has understood the challenges with high supply risk concentration. And in a recent study which we launched in September, we have tried to identify the potential components where India can be competitive based on the industries that exist. So there's, of course, very highly competitive textile industry, chemical, pharmaceutical, automobile industry that exists in India. And in one of the reports that we released, we have identified and tried to map that these are maybe 10 components that India should first focus on to become competitive. And these are the industries that where we can do learnings from itself. So maybe I can stop there and come back later. Thank you.
Amit?
So I'll start with the question on resource imports. The thing is, it doesn't matter what resource it is, we will always be importing maybe 80-90% of whatever we need. I think that is something we can take as a given. Now, given this background, which are the resources that we are comfortable importing? I think many years back, when I was a young reporter, one of the heads of Indian oil companies, BPCL, he told me, Amit, there has never been a time in the last 70 years that India had the money to pay for it and the oil wasn't available. You know, there is a supply chain which has worked very well since 1945. There are countries who understand that their welfare depends on having predictable supplies, stable supplies of oil, which is the GCC and the others. And it is an industry which is not at all concentrated. Not a single country accounts for more than 10 or 12% of the global oil supply chain. We want to destroy this and we want to move to a supply chain which is dominated by one country, China, for not one mineral, for multiple minerals. Two, we want to destroy certain manufacturing industries which still exist in this country, automobiles for instance, and say that let us transfer this to China just like the Europeans have done. Now, the Europeans could have afforded it. I'm not sure if we can. So there is a saying that if it is not broken, don't try to fix it. I think maybe we can try and follow that philosophy in case of the petroleum industry at this point of time. There is one other issue I would just like to bring up, the issue of fish, that is, micro and macro. The thing is that when we go to Sri Lanka, we find that their fish markets have really large-sized tuna and pretty much everything compared to what we have on the Indian side. I think it is also an issue of depletion and overfishing. And one of the prickly issues between India and Sri Lanka is Indian fishermen going into Sri Lankan waters and fishing over there. And every month there are reports that some Tamil fishermen have been arrested. So I think this might be an issue that of overfishing and overexploitation of a resource. There was a point which was made about whether the capacity we are putting up for renewable energy, what happens when it expires. In fact, I think a question would be, do we actually have enough of the resources to fulfill all the promises that we are making? A automobile, a car requires maybe about, I think, 11 kilograms of lithium, if I'm not wrong. And you try transferring that to a truck. You are talking about maybe a couple of tons of lithium just to have the truck run, give a similar performance as a diesel truck. There is not that much lithium in the Earth's crust actually to convert all our trucking fleet to electric. So I would say that the sustainability issues there all across. The sustainability industry is not as sustainable as it professes to be.
Just quickly,
Yep.
on the resources, I would say this is true, and we've been hearing this. I often say that oil will deplete in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years since childhood, but we continue to look for more oil and more exploration. I think that is the case with minerals also. Because the deployment of EVs was not expected, we have not necessarily looked for more lithium. We work very closely with Ministry of Mines, and they often say, the geologists, that in our research 15 years, 20 years ago, GSI, they always found lithium, but did not necessarily think much. They always focused on the more important minerals. So many of these are not necessarily documented. India found one of the largest resources in Jammu Kashmir. Of course, there are other challenges. China recently found a huge resources in their own country. So I think lithium per se, I think there's enough, but there are other minerals which of course are challenging to find, maybe like rare earth minerals, copper itself, despite being much available, there are challenges itself. But at the same time, I want to just highlight, there are enough technological innovations that are happening across the world to find alternatives to many of these minerals. For instance, silver paste that is used in solar modules sometimes can be the cost can be 20% of the overall module cost when the silver cost is high, but that is potentially being replaced by copper. So there are alternatives that are being trying to found. There's an Indian company manufacturing motors that does not require rare earth itself. So in all the projections, we may think that, okay, this much rare earth will be required, but then there's a new tech, no rare earth required itself. So I think it will be a dynamic scenario itself.
Yes, Manvi.
So very quickly, I think, maybe this is not the forum, but what is broken is debatable. Amit, maybe offline we could take this up. But yeah, I'll give you an example of the state that I work very closely with, Odisha. It's one of the states where, they're sitting on a lot of coal and it's not likely to exhaust anytime soon. Potentially the last coal mine that, if it gets closed in India, would be in Odisha, given their resources. But I'm really, it's heartening to see the way that these coal states are understanding what is broken and sort of adjusting to it. Part of it is that the market is also giving them signals that this is the pathway that you need to take. But really, it is the climate change challenge that they themselves are sort of facing at the forefront. With the intensity of things getting worse and worse every year, that this additional push is coming into play. So yeah, the climate change impact at the micro level, I think from the perspective of even some of these decision makers is very much part of the decision making process. On the RE policy being biased question that you had asked, I don't know if there's any subsidy that is unbiased in true sense, that it will obviously support a certain section of the society. But specifically as far as rooftop is concerned, there are implementation tools and business models through which even people who do not have roof can have access to rooftop sort of benefits, whether it is through what is called virtual net metering or group net metering, wherein sort of even without a roof you can have that setup. Of course, these are a little bit more advanced, and maybe the people who don't have roofs may not have access to it. But as RESCO, the markets develop, those things will become more and more accessible. So rooftop is not just for people with roofs going forward. I'm glad that you brought the ozone question, because it's in fact one of the most successful examples of how multilateralism has helped address a major sort of global crisis. And there are a lot of lessons to learn, but again, at the fundamental level, there has to be an agreement on what is broken. So yeah, I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Madhvi. Nisha ji?
I think all the questions has been answered. So I will talk about, we are talking about so many problems and issues. Let's discuss for a few moments what are the new things which government has taken lead and created a new positive environment for India basically for the climate change and climate change or climate management, environment management. Now this is the era of entrepreneurial activities, and government. I will address, of course, your question which you have talked about, which initially I talked about roof problem of rooftop and subsidies. Again, here what I found the problem of implementation. Government has given subsidies, government has provided resources, but somehow the problem it comes in between of implementation and awareness, and sometimes they found that from where they will get the fund, from where, how they will fix the problem, how at rural area the problem can be fixed. That is a problem of implementation. But the other part of now is climate or environment management. Of course, we should discuss about the issues, but I will discuss about. I'm discussing about some initiative which government has taken for climate management. So now government is proposing many ideas and the support to the entrepreneur who are working for climate management, who are working for environment management. One example I will tell you, that is the Help Us Green. Help Us Green has made the water resource management and made religion as a eco-friendly religion. So the flower which is offered to the river and to the temple and everywhere, and that was creating water problem and water pollution. And that these founder, they started thinking some innovative way to reduce water pollution. They started collecting water, and then they produced from these flowers. They started making some essence and started giving job to the women, empowering women, and creating better situation for the local women, for the local economy. And that has created an ecosystem which is working for others also, that not to pollute water. So water pollution, there are a number of examples of energy saving, energy conservation, and government is giving subsidies. And now you can see that there are various social bond which are working for environment management. So one part of talking about energy security and energy equity, and how this energy security and energy equity comes, is through management. If we focus towards the management, be it the Panch Tattva, which we talk about, water, air, land, and space, everything here the social entrepreneurs are working. Government is promoting such social entrepreneur, and which is really making a difference in the society at various levels. First level is at the local level, creating a difference at the local level, or maybe at the place, we call it local change maker. Few are working which are really changing the policy. We call it a change maker who are working
Nisha
for
could
the
quickly wrap up.
governance. So there are various social entrepreneurs who are working at the local to global level and making change in energy management. So climate change and climate security, if we can talk about energy management, that is also a part of discussion and working. We need a deeper research in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishaji. We have run out of our time. I won't dare summarize the discussion, but I just want to make one remark. Somebody said about the unforeseen consequences. Yes, there will always be unforeseen consequences, but most of the time they emerge because our view, our vision, our perspective, our thinking has been single-minded or very myopic. We have to broaden our way of thinking. Our landscape of questions that we want to engage with has to be wide enough, balanced enough, and as we say, and this holds true for our topic for this session, that diplomacy is a art of possible. So we should keep all the options open. It would be myopic to put all our eggs into one basket. I wouldn't put my entire faith in coal and fossil-based industries, however lucrative and promising it may look like today. But for the time being, I would also not put the same faith in the renewables sector either. I would not decide my foreign policy, which is exclusively in China-centric, but there are other players, and those dynamics we have to keep in mind. But simultaneously, we have to strengthen ourselves, our own capabilities. What is possible within has to be examined carefully and critically, and that's where I would also keep the possibility of finding that the policies, the way we have designed, may need further improvement. They may not be as good as they appear. So I would add a little bit of caution to the optimism that Nishaji concluded his remarks with. With that, let's conclude this session and put our hands together for our wonderful panelists. Thank you.